They didn't come to my booth for a while. And they acted real strange, and finally the woman came back to my booth and she said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Well, cab driver just brought me in." She said, "Well, did you notice a motorcycle gang right next door?" I said, "No." She said, "Well, you got to get out of here." And she moved me from that booth back where you couldn't see me through the window. And she said, "They come in here, when they come in here, they just order up what they want and never pay us, slap us around."
Oh, wow.
They kill people. God, she went and called a cab for me. And cab came up. I got up, went out, got in the cab. He said, "What the hell are you doing in this part of town?" And when I got back to the office the next day, the flood had happened in Masters Mill. And Evie told me, said, "Do you know anything about your mother?" I said, "No, what are you talking about?" She said, "Well, the flood, and it flooded Masters Mill." I said, "Oh, no." I said, "When I was a kid, we had floods every year. But they finally, during one of Roosevelt's program, WPA or something, they had a fellow bring a steam shovel in and change a riverbed." And I said, "We haven't had a flood since." Well, she turned the radio on and I listened to it for about 5 minutes and I said, "Well, I'm going to Masters Mill." So my man and Dave went with me. And
Who went with you?
a Turkish fellow that worked with us. Okay. Matt Ande, he's still here. He's an American citizen now.
And Uncle David and others called him Andy.
And we went up 250 to Afton and went on down by Nellis Ford. And when we got to Nellis Ford, the bridge was washed out. And
So I'm not sure, I know exactly where now. So you went up 250 and then you made that turn on to, is that 151?
yeah,
All right, so how far is Nelly's Ford from, how close
Nellis
is it?
Ford is right where Stony Creek is.
Yeah, that's what I thought. That's why I was asking, because I didn't think, okay.
Stony Creek is right.
So
at
the
Nellis
bridge was
Ford.
out there, okay.
And the bridge, after you get through Nellis Ford, it's just a creek bridge, but it was a concrete bridge that was washed out.
Uh-huh.
And so I said, "Well, let's go up on the Blue Ridge Parkway and go down that to Campbell's Mountain and come down that way to Masters Mill." Well, when we got to the foot of Campbell's Mountain,
So just so I can follow this, so you made a right-hand turn going up to Wintergreen and got on the parkway? Is that what you're doing?
yeah,
Okay, all right.
and then went on down to where the road turns off to the right to go to Love and turns off to the left to come down to Nash.
Okay.
And when we got down to Nash, now we came down to Campbell's Mountain. When we got down to 56, there ain't no way in the world to get across the river. The bridge was washed out. It was getting dark, and so we gave up for the night. And we got up early the next morning and decided we'd go back the way we started the first time and walk from Nellis Forward to Mass's Mill.
Which I'm estimating is 20 miles.
It's a right good ways.
Okay.
And we caught a truck, took us part of the way up after up Brent's Mountain, and all those carriers were washed out. And he took us part of the way, and then we got off and walked. And we walked down to where there was a fella played football here. His family owned a nursery in Waynesboro, and they had some land up above Brown. That's a nursery that they grew things on. And the road was washed out there. And we walked on around the road, by the road, and a fellow came walking up opposite way. I didn't know him. He didn't know me. And I said, "Where are you coming from?" He said, "Well, I got a child that spent the night over somewhere around Batesville, and I'm going to see how my child is." And I said, "Well, where did you live?" He said, up toward Fawcett from Mass's Mill." I said, "Well, did you know Ms. Mahone?" He said, "Oh, yeah." I said, "Well, do you know whether she's all right?" He said, "Yeah, she's all right, I saw her." And he said, "My car is right down at that store." And he keys up over the visor. He said, "You take that car and go down to Old Fleetwood and go in that way, and I think you can get into Mass's Mill." And we did. And it was a damn mess. And I got to asking around about my mother, and they said, "Well, she's all right. She's going over to the Gants, over to Evelyn's."
Okay.
And I don't know who came and got her, whether it's Big Louis or Little Louis or who. But I went over to see her.
And she was about how old this time? This is 1969.
69.
She was born 1980, I mean 18.
She was born in 92.
Okay, so she's 77 years old then.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I looked in that house, and it was mud that damn deep. And I asked her, I said, "Mother, what happened? What did you do?" She said, "Well, I woke up sometime in the night, and the whole house was shaking." And I said, "Well," I tried to cut the light on, bedside light, and she said there was no electricity. You can imagine there was no electricity. And she said, "I remember that my flashlight was down on a cupboard in where we ate, and I'll go down and get that." So she said, "When I stepped in the third step from the top, I stepped into water." I said, "What'd you do then?" She said, "I went back and got in the middle of my bed and covered up my head and prayed until daylight." And Walter Hoffman and some other people were out there with a boat when she woke up. and she climbed out of her window onto the roof and got down that way to Walter's boat, and he took her out.
Now, I guess I have at least, well, I have many questions, but the first two would be my recollection is her house was one of the only ones on that street that survived. Is that true?
Yeah. And the thing that saved it was a kitchen that washed off a house on the opposite side of the street, about what would be a block away, and lodged up against a walnut tree right at the house. And it caused the water to hit that thing and go out both ways.
So the tree didn't actually fall on the house?
No.
Because I'd always misheard that story and thought the tree fell on the house and that was diverting the water, but it was the kitchen.
It's where the kitchen hung up.
Okay.
And it dug a hole in the backyard that was as big around as it was symmetrical in a circle, and it was about as wide as from here to the wall, and it was about 6 feet deep. It's a perfect looked like somebody planned it to be that shape.
Do you want me to add what I remember your mother saying about when she woke up and daylight came?
Yeah.
Well, her bedroom was the room right over the store, if y'all remember that room.
Right, I do.
And it had these high windows, so she got a stool,
What you call dormer windows.
yeah, and pulled it up there and looked out the windows. Well, the house next door to her was still standing. Wasn't directly behind her, it was beside and kind of set back more. And so she looked out, and Corinne Painter, who was her neighbor and also who had worked in the store with her, for her, was standing on the porch, and she yelled to Corinne. And Corinne said, "Miss Mahone, are you all right?" And she said, "Yes." And Corinne said, "Someone will come and get you." And there were rowboats out there in the water. At that time, she could see the boats. So when the water receded a little bit, began to recede relatively quickly, I guess, they could row up to the house, and I guess she crawled out the window. I thought she walked down the steps, but I guess I was wrong.
Water was still downstairs. But when I first went in the house, the water had receded. And the mud in the first floor was that deep. And that clock that your daddy had up in Rochester,
Mm-hmm.
that was mud in that. And he took it and cleaned it up, and then you gave it to me after he died.
John gave it to you.
Huh?
John and his sisters gave it to you. Is that what
And-
you okay.
So
He gave
then,
each of us a bag of the mud.
That's generous.
I don't know where our bag of mud is. I think it's around here somewhere.
and so then I got Mother, not that day, but a couple of days later, and took her over to Batesville where I lived. And she lived with me the last 3 years of her life. And when we got, Grace got home a few minutes before I did, 5 minutes before I did, and she met me before I got out of the car and said, "Your mother's had a stroke." And I went in and picked her up and took her to the car and took her to the University Hospital, and she
had
was
already
able
called
to.
the doctor.
Huh?
I had already spoken to the doctor. And he said it would be quicker if you bring her in than to try to get the rescue squad.
And I guess that was the freshman year that y'all went to Virginia.
It was 1969, so
Yeah.
we had, I think it was my second year. I went to school in 68
Yeah.
and was just coming, so this is probably August of 69, right?
Well, she did
Oh, no,
When
I'm
she
sorry.
died,
Yeah,
it
we
was-
died.
1972.
So we were graduating.
You
then.
were
Yeah.
graduating, and you and Debbie were married that summer in
Yep.
June.
Yep, exactly.
And so I took her into the University Hospital, and she was cosmic. And she talked to me about what she wanted to do with her property and so forth, and where the will was and so forth. And they came and got her, and they told me that just right after they got her, she passed out. And she died the next night. She never did regain conscious.
Very sad.
What?
time.
She was a pleasure to live with. And we fixed up a room, added a bathroom for her, right in her room. And I remember after she moved in, I was making a room upstairs in the old schoolhouse where I had the pool table and all that kind of stuff,
Right.
and basketball rim. And Philip came up one morning, just a little boy, and he said, it was about the middle of the morning, he'd had his breakfast. In the middle of the morning, he said, Daddy, I'm hungry. I said, well, go down there and ask your grandmother or Miss Kirby, either one, to give you something to eat. He said, I'm afraid Grandmama wouldn't give me anything. I said, well, you go try.
Miss Kirby wasn't there.
I thought she was.
Now, he would have asked Miss Kirby for something.
I know, but she was scared to ask her why Grandma was down there with them. They both were there.
Okay.
In a little while, he came back. He was just happy as he could be. They'd made him a sandwich.
Well, speaking of Philip, as you, I think you know, he sent you an email asking you some questions about Camille. Did you guys get those or not? Okay. Well, his final one, just to sum it up, he says, after the fact, tell us how Hurricane Camille affected your life, both good and bad. So, is there anything you would like to
You
add?
said Philip who?
Philip Mahone, your son.
Our son?
Uh-huh.
It's funny, I never had any of those.
Yeah.
It wasn't Philip in Oregon, huh?
Nope.
He doesn't have email.
Yeah, and
Oh, he doesn't?
it says for sure it's well, I talked to Philip, so it's a question from your son Philip, and you've covered his first 5 questions in your general answer, but his final one was, after the fact, tell us how Hurricane Camille affected your life, both good and bad. So is there anything
Well,
else
the
you
good
want to?
thing was that Mrs. Mahone came to live with us. That was wonderful.
And that she survived.
And that she survived. Oh, yeah, that was number one good thing, that she survived
I
that
mean, you had those
horrific storm.
3 extra years with her that many people didn't have with their families.
Exactly. And when she lived with us, it was wonderful because I was working at the time. And we did have a housekeeper who came in. But the housekeeper died the second year Miss Mahone was there. So there was someone there when Philip came home from school. And it was very comforting, to us to know that she was there. And she seemed to be happy there.
Well, compared to living in,
I think that was probably the happiest she is that she, last 3 years that she had, were the happiest years she'd had since all the kids had left home.
it had to be very lonely living in that
Well,
house.
she did say
on
she
her
would
own.
get lonesome, living alone. So I think she enjoyed being with us, and we certainly benefited greatly from that.
And it wasn't like she'd gone 100 miles away from home. She was still close to
Yeah,
everything she knew.
and the family could come quickly and see her.
And she had her stroke just a little bit before Grace got there. And she was fixing supper. And she leaned over to get the bread out of the oven. That's when she had a stroke.
Well, she actually went to bed.
Uh-huh.
She put herself to bed,
Yeah.
because when I got home, everything was dark, which is, unusual. The kitchen was dark, and her bedroom was dark. And I came on in and went in the living room, which had lights, and Philip and his friend Bert were in the living room. And I said, well, where's grandmother? And he said, well, she had a headache and she went to bed. So I knew something was wrong. I went in, and from what she told me, I knew she'd had a stroke. So
When I was fixing the bathroom, I had my 2 oldest boys, Tom and Steve, dig a trench up under the house to get pipe and everything to the bathroom. And everybody said I was just horrible to those boys to make them dig that trench. It was about that deep, long as we get to the kitchen.
your mother especially thought it was too hard for those little
And
boys.
Frank was over at the house one day, and Frank was a plumber. And I said, I got some things I want to ask you about the bathroom. Well, had a hole sawed in the floor for the commode, and the boys were up under the house digging,